I was born Elisabeth Peper in Amsterdam, Holland. My parents, my mom Clara, my father Abraham, gave me and my brother Philip really a wonderful life. We were spoiled, but we had everything. We had a very warm home. We had a wonderful, loving family. My dad had 3 sisters. His parents, my mom's parents, unfortunately my grandfather had passed away, but my grandmother, my little Oma, I'll talk about her later, lived with us. And my mother had 2 brothers, one with children and one living in Antwerp, that was in Belgium. That was at that time, it's still a different country, but now they're all open borders. And I used to love to go there because you could bring your passport or something that you were a Dutchman, some papers. Was very interesting. Now you're there in an hour. Not by plane, by car. And we lived in the city of Amsterdam, and there are many more people and friends that I really remember, and I would like to talk about them, but that's quite impossible. I keep it to my family. I really believe that the Holocaust was the most incomprehensible and the worst dehumanizing experience of the 20th century. And when I sit here in front of you, I find it every time unbelievable that I lived through that in person for 5 very long years. It happened more than 70 years ago, and I was a child. And I was a child condemned to death. And when I'm here today, I really like to tell you my memories, because when there are no more survivors left, and pretty soon that's going to happen, that can talk to you, you will have to talk for us, because you're probably the last generation that will hear a survivor speak. Because I never, ever want the horrendous crimes that happened forgotten. I'm really very fortunate. I, Elisabeth Peper Knoop, can talk to you. 6 million people were murdered. Never ever forget that. 1,500,000 were children under the age of 15, and I had come very close. You're sitting here, you're in middle school, high school, you hope you have dreams. You may want to go to college, you want to be a nurse, you want to be an artist, you want to be a physician, whatever you want to be, you're going to have an opportunity to fulfill those dreams. You may change them every now and then, but whatever you're dreaming, you're going to fulfill. Those people, 1,500,000 people under the age of 15 had those dreams too. But they were murdered before they really could think of them. So I feel very grateful that I am here and able to talk to you, because it really is a miracle. And when I tell you what happened, you will have to speak for us, because pretty soon there are no survivors left. You know, Hitler really started his war in Germany against the Jews in 1932. That war widened in September 1939 when the German army invaded Poland, and on Friday the 10th of May 1940 the German armies invaded the Low Countries, Belgium and the Netherlands. The Netherlands, my country of birth. The Netherlands, where Jews had lived for approximately over 300 years. The Dutch Jews really believed nothing is going to happen to them. A lot of German people had moved into Holland to get away from Hitler. The Germans have to be afraid. We're Dutch, nothing can happen to us. But we were wrong. For us, life seemed to go on like normal. I remember I had the chicken pox when the war first broke out. Holland capitulated in 4 days and I was itchy, you know, I remember the itching. And pretty soon, of course, when I was better, I went to school and it seemed that everything was normal. But frankly, the decrees and orders against us Jews, men, women and children, came very fast. They were really made to destroy our pride and self-esteem. Unfortunately, the Germans succeeded too well. Gradually, the Jews were stripped of their rights, their social standing, businesses and possessions were confiscated. And I remember quite well how we had to go to some park area where we had to deliver all our personal belongings, like radios, like bicycles. If you ever visit the Netherlands, look for you don't have to look for the bicycles, they're all over. As many cars as there are, everybody rides a bike. Sometimes I joke about it. I think we learn to ride a bike before we can walk. Doesn't take very long. But we have to give up the bicycles. We had to give up all personal belongings. And you know, I grew up in a Jewish family. We were a secular Jewish family. But my parents had decided their children have to learn to speak French, German, and English. And one day there will be a state of Israel. So our children have to learn Hebrew as a living language. And we had a teacher come to the house that taught us Hebrew, but he also thought he should tell us, and I took it in like a sponge because I liked it. I liked what he was telling me about traditions and Jewish holidays. And I was just fascinated by it. I must admit I still am. But and I see him in front of me. But also, when we had to give up our personal belongings, I wear here around my neck this little, I don't know what you call it, whatever it is, and I never take it off. And when I was 6 years old, I asked for my 6th birthday, could I have a Star of David to wear around my neck? Because I liked it. And I felt good about it. My parents gave it to me, and I had to give up that Star of David. I had to bring that to these people that took all our possessions. And in its stead, I got this Star of David. It says on here, Jood, which stands for Jew in Dutch. We had to wear it on all outer clothes. So I wear this, it had to be on the jacket, it had to be on my sweater, and if I would be wearing a coat, it had to be on my coat, and it had to be untied. We had a lot of these things around. I would like to give it around that you can look at it. You know, all of a sudden, my little gold David star I had to give up that I was so proud of. But this made you feel quite different. If I'd like to look, if you want to see it, I can give it around, but I have, and you're in charge that I get it back, okay? It was really an awful thing to wear. Large signs, forbidden to Jews, appeared everywhere. Mom, we used to go swimming a few times a week. The pools became close to us. No more skating, no more movies, no more walks in the park, no more outside playgrounds. Then we had to leave our school, and I remember that quite well. Our classes were getting less pupils. My school did not want to give up their Jewish pupils. So, and thank you. And I liked the school very much, and it was on a square, and there were huge doors, I can see them still, and I loved going through those doors. I felt it, and into a big hall. It was really a very special school to me. But we couldn't go in there any longer. We had to go through a back alley into a narrow entrance, into a filthy little yard thing. And then there were 3 classrooms that they had for their Jewish pupils. One for kindergarten, one for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And this is all elementary school, of course. And one for 4th, 5th, and 6th together. Our classes grew smaller all the time. You know, children had been picked up in the middle of the night to be taken to the camps and lose their lives. Whole families, not just the children. And people had gone into hiding. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Anne Frank. You know, that family went into hiding and unfortunately were caught. So that was not the only family, there were quite a few of those. So, and that happened to our teachers as well. I think we changed teachers as I changed a pair of shoes. You know, when I think back of it, it was painful, it was frightening. And you couldn't understand it. Well, nobody did. February 1941, after a fight between Dutch Nazis and Jews, where the Jews managed to kill a Nazi member, the Germans retaliated by taking off the streets 450 young men between the ages of 18 and 40. They took them out of their houses off the street, and I know it so well because my uncle, my mother's brother, had been one of these people. He had just turned 41 years old a few days before, so he didn't have to go on. But I'm telling you this story because these were 450 young men. The youngest 18, the oldest 40. They were first sent to Buchenwald, a concentration camp in Germany. And after 6 weeks, they were sent, whoever was still alive, to Mauthausen, a concentration camp in Austria, where they worked in the salt mines. By September 1941, 450 young men between the ages of 18 and 40 were all gone. There was not a single one alive, 6 months after they were picked up. But I must say a miracle took place in Amsterdam. After the men were picked up, my mom is taking my brother and me to school. And we encountered men carrying big signs, stop the streetcars, stop the mail delivery, stop everything, we are striking in protest what the German occupation is doing to our Dutch Jewish citizens. That strike really was amazing. It lasted off and on for 4 days. Then, of course, the Germans retaliated, took many people hostage, and at random picked 9 people, put them along a wall and killed them. And that strike is remembered every year in the Sephardic synagogue in Amsterdam. That synagogue is a beaut, it's a jewel. It was built in 1641. It's the only place that the Germans left alone. I never know why. Even today, it's still lit by candlelight. It's quite large. And in front of that synagogue stands a statue of the dock worker, because it had been the dock workers that had started that strike. It was really an amazing feat of solidarity and enormous courage. September 1942. My Aunt Henny, and every time I say it, I see her in front of me. And we all have a favorite aunt, or a favorite uncle, or a favorite friend. She really was my favorite aunt. My uncle saw her husband. My cousins, Mary and Betty. She was Big Betty. I was Little Betty. Were taken out of their house. Well, I like being, so that I was little. I was bigger than she was in length, because she was really a little one. They were taken out of their house and thrown in jail. And my dad was notified, and they were going from jail in Amsterdam. They were told they were going to be sent to Poland. They had no clothes, they had nothing. And I can see it still like it happened yesterday. My uncle had a slew of sisters that were sitting at our house, and they were packing knapsacks for the children, for my uncle, for my aunt, and pushing name tags in so that they should know what everything was for. And then I remember, shouldn't we put in the kids' thing an extra bar of chocolate or something in their knapsacks? Well, and I'm telling you this because sometimes, at that time, I'm just about 11 years old, and not quite at the end of the month. And these women sitting on the table, and I don't really remember what I had to go get, but one of the women decided, oh, she's a big girl, and she can go to my apartment, and I had to cross one street for that, and get, I don't know what I had to get. It was something I could hold in my hand. Evidently, my mom didn't have it, so I went to get it at her apartment, whatever it was. And on the way, because I'm telling you this, because sometimes when I spoke many years ago, somebody asked me, were you afraid? And I said, no, I always was with my mom and dad. I felt very protected by them. But I'll tell you how afraid I was. Because as I came back, I had to cross one street and there was a high stoop. It was a beautiful day in September. And I'm wearing, that is long before jeans, I'm wearing little socks and a skirt. And as I go onto the, cross the street, go onto the stoop, I tripped. And I scraped my leg. 2 trickles of blood I see going down. And the thought I had at that moment, and I'm not quite 11 years old, oh, if I keep a scar from this fall, I'll never see my favorite Aunt Henny, my Uncle Saul, or my cousins alive again. And I think the fright must have been unbelievable, because I do not believe that a 10 or 11-year-old child thinks that way. You know, I never saw them again. My aunt and my cousins, Betty and Mary, were murdered September 14th, 1942. It was exactly 2 days after my cousin's 14th birthday, my cousin Betty. My uncle lived, and he died in April 1945 in the concentration camp Buchenwald. It was a few weeks before the liberation of that camp. And believe me, I never forget how my dad was searching in the different displaced people camps for his oldest niece Mary. He had felt sure if anybody of his sister's family survived, it will be his niece Mary, the first niece he ever had. Mary had been 16 years old when they murdered her. You know, on October 30th, my grandfather, my father's father, my opa died. He had been quite ill, and I'm only telling you this because at my grandfather's funeral, my dad and his brother-in-laws and my brother who had come with them had to put my opa's casket on a pushcart and walk all the way to the cemetery. My brother often spoke about that long and painful walk. Cars had been denied us. Now I go to January 18, 1943. The Dutch, and I want you to hear that I say the Dutch, it was not the Germans, it was the Dutch, because they had the Dutch police do all the dirty work, and of course they gave themselves to do the dirty work. They rang our doorbell. It had been really afternoon, early afternoon. They came to pick up my grandmother. I happened to have been home because I had a sore throat and my mom kept me home. My brother was in school. And my grandmother had lived with us ever since my grandfather had died. Oh, wouldn't Mrs. Mock, because they were exceedingly polite, be far more comfortable if she has her daughter on her side. So where is your husband? Well, my dad wasn't home. And I don't know how Mom did it, but she got me out of the house to try and see if I could find my dad, or maybe somebody that could warn him that we were being picked up, and would he please try to get my brother from school and not come home because this is what's happening. So I saw a neighbor of ours, and I ran away, and I said, Mr. Pfeffer, please see if you can find my dad and tell him such and such. He was successful in that. He found my dad picked my brother up from school and took him to somebody's house where they hid him under the staircase. At about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, it is early dark in January. It was the 18th of January. We were put into a truck. The trucks came back. My Oma, my mom, and myself. And my mom saw my brother. He tried to hide himself because he saw that this was happening. And she says, Philip. And of course my brother came with us then too. We were immediately taken to the train station, put into trains, and sent to Westerbork. Westerbork was a deportation camp in Holland, very close to the German border. We arrived there, I don't know how long a ride it was. Was it 2 hours, was it 4 hours, no idea. And it was dark, and there are people going by the train that say elderly people and sick people, stay in the train, somebody will help you disembark. Sounded very nice. So my Oma, my grandma, my little Oma, she was really a little woman, and we were all tall in my family, reasonable tall, said, Clara, you take the 2 children, you have your hands full, and I have them help me off the train. What's the big deal? Any mom would have said that. Anybody would have done that. She wasn't really that old. I'm today 18 years older than she ever was. So she really wasn't that old. She was 70 years old. So we did. Mom went off the train with us. And you know, I am very aware that 6 million people, and probably more, were murdered. But this little lady was my grandma, my Oma, who, for her, you may have all straight A's. Her children had triple straight A's. You may play an instrument. Well, maybe you play very well, but you should hear how my children play. Everything we did, we could do better than anybody else. She had long hair that she wore up. We would, oh, Oma, it's time for a new hairdo. We would take the pins out of her hair, put it down, and play with her hair. Oma tell us stories, Oma sing us songs, thank you. Oma sing us songs. She was always busy with us. She was a nice little lady. I hope that if my grandchildren think half that well of me, I'd be very satisfied. Anyway, let me tell you about Westerbork. I remember that camp quite well. It was a deportation camp in Holland. It was originally built by the Dutch for German Jewish refugees without money or work permits. It was a drab piece of land in the north of Holland, very near the German border. And even though the Dutch government decided to build there, the Dutch Jewish community had to pay for the building of the camp, so we had paid for our own building. To me, when we came into the camp, it seemed large. We lived in wooden barracks. We slept in iron triple bunk beds with wooden benches and tables. It was a bit dirty. No decent facilities. It was really awful. And we always walked around in dirt because Holland is a very rainy country and the streets weren't paved, so we were always full of mud. We were a bit hungry, but my dad sent us food packages from Amsterdam, so that helped. On March 15, 1943, a miracle happened. My mom, my brother Philip, and myself were released from Westerbork and returned to Amsterdam to be reunited with my dad. Believe me, our happiness had no end. All four of us together again. But then, my Oma, my grandmother Elizabeth, the woman I was named for, had been taken from her home and sent to Poland, where they murdered her March 26, 1943. I never saw my dad defeated, all the years of the war not. But his despair was frightening to see, because no matter how hard he had tried, he could not get his mom released. April 1943, we were told to move. Amsterdam, a city that never ever had ghettos, got one now. Well, it was easier because whatever Jews were left over could be picked up all together and shipped out. It was not that terrible to live in the ghetto, at least not to us children. We were in Amsterdam and certainly not in a camp. April 1943 saw my mom's brother, Alexander, and his wife, plus their two children, my cousins Eva, 14 years old, and my cousin Philip, 12 years old, taken from their home and sent to Sobibor, a camp in Poland, to be murdered on April 30th, 1943. My aunt had been a very religious woman, and there is a service on Saturday afternoon that I love to go to our house for. That is where you light a candle, you pray for a sweet week to follow, and thank for the good week that you have had, and it always provoked very special feelings in me. I love to go to her house just to see that ceremony. I still like it. While we were living in the ghetto, the Germans took my dad hostage, and he had been involved with the resistance, and his arrest had been very frightening to my mom, brother, and me, and he was put in jail in Amsterdam. And I remember also I woke up with a horrendous toothache. There was no dentist in the ghetto, so I had to go all by myself. My brother was sick, to outside of the ghetto. Of course, everybody knew I was a Jew with the Star of David foremost wearing, to a new dentist, where I arrived at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There wasn't a person in the waiting room. The waiting room filled up. He didn't see me until maybe 6 o'clock. And then he looked at my mouth and he said, well, I should pull some things because you're never going to be able to get another dentist again. Reinforce the fact that our likelihood to stay in Amsterdam and of survival was very slim. And at last, on the 29th of September 1943, my dad was still in jail. I say that with pride, my dad was in jail. Unbelievable. So me, my mom and my brother, again taken to Westerbork. The camp was far more frightening, and the transports to the east were more menacing. And I remember those transports. Every Monday, every single Monday, the trains came into the camp. Freight cars, not fit for human travel. Where were they taking us? These cars were pushed full of people, and that was the end of them. Every woman, every man, every boy, every girl in that camp knew once we had to put our feet in those trains, we didn't know what was going to happen. It was very menacing. And I know we were incarcerated in Westerbork, but Westerbork was in Holland, and Holland was our home. What was in store for us once we had to leave was really frightening. And I remember how the Germans came into the barracks every Monday night with a list, and the lists were placed in alphabetical order. And I can hear the screams from the people whose names were called. I can also see the relief of those people whose names were not called, and yes, were incarcerated in Holland. But Holland was still their home, and they could stay another week. That fright and that happiness is unbelievable. A while after we arrived in Westerbork, they released my dad from jail, and they sent him to Westerbork, but again, he had to be put in a jail in Westerbork with special uniform that he wore the whole war. Was the only thing he had on his body, not that we had very much. And he was able to get a job outside of the prison wall, so we saw him daily. And the fact that we knew he was near us made us all feel a bit better. My father was also in time in Westerbork, so he could say goodbye to his youngest sister, his sister Mies, who together with her husband and their daughter, my cousin Billy, were sent to Sobibor on November 6, 1946. You know, I often think of my cousin Billy. She was a beautiful child. She was about 8, 9 years old by that time, I think. She was little. She had blonde curls. And when you spoke to her, at one point she would put her hands on your throat to feel what you were saying, because our Billy had been born a deaf mute. They killed her when she was 9 years old. At last, on the end of January, my mom, my brother and I, and my dad smuggled himself into the train. He was not supposed to come there. were sent to Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was a concentration camp in Germany. I'm sitting here because Bergen-Belsen had no gas chambers, so your chances of survival become a little better. We were there from the end of January 44 till April 9th, 1945, when they took us out of the camps. And they let us march to Celle, the station, which was about 7 miles away. And there were 3 trains standing, all boxcars, where they pushed us in, maybe 70 to 100 people to a wagon. Sick people, old people, young people, men, women. Really pushed in there. This train, there were 3 trains. We were supposed to be sent to another camp. I believe it was Theresienstadt. One of the trains reached it. The second train was liberated because we all started riding on the 9th of April by the English and American armies. But our train, the train that my mom and dad and my brother and I was, no food, no water, no. When the train stopped, my brother and I would get off the train and see if around we could find something, which we sometimes did. And I remember, and I will never forget it, I jumped out of the train one time, and you probably learned it too, but when I was in school, I had learned about, the early years people, and how they cooked, that they made with a certain kind of, that they had made a little fire, and I saw that because people had found some carrots, and they found something to make that fire. And I was so fascinated that they could do that. Crazy, but it's true. That train ride, we went on that train on the 9th of April. We stayed in the station for 2 or 3 more days, and then this train started riding in a 70-mile radius. I remember going through Berlin, and that city was totally flat. There were bombardments. In the meantime, the Russians and the English and Americans were fighting all around us. As a matter of fact, one person got killed on our train from one of the fights that were going along. And eventually, on the 23rd of April, 1945, after having been in that train since the 9th of April, we were liberated, and we were liberated by the Russian army in a tiny, tiny town called Ströbitz. Our train came to be known as the Lost Transport because nobody knew where the train was. I don't know how they found it, but it was found, otherwise it couldn't have been the Lost Transport, right? And the Russians, who speaks Russians? Any of you speak Russian here? And the Russians don't speak any other language either. They spoke no English, no. It was unbelievable. And I remember that they came into the wagons as wild people, and when all they knew was the word Uhr, that is for watch in German. Well, we had nothing. But there were no watches, there were no rings, there were nothing. We were skeletons more. We looked like unbelievable. And they didn't know what to do with us, and I don't know, we stayed on that train for another 3 days. People that could walk and leave the trains left, and when the people from that village had left their houses, they had been afraid of the Russians that were getting in there. And some people from the train, with a couple of families to a house, went into those houses. But my mom couldn't walk. She was lying on a stretcher, so we couldn't go to her house. Nobody could carry her. So we stayed in that train another 3 days, and after 3 days, we were put, I think it was probably an old army camp. And as my mom was on a stretcher, and she was not the only one, there were more people, the stretchers were put in a mess hall that is on the floor. And my dad got assigned a room, and there was a bed a double bed, and 2 beds were there, and in the other bed was a woman with her children. And as I, at that point, was the only one that could walk in our family, he said, please go see if you can find people that will take mommy and be with her so she can be here, at least here as a bed. So I went to try and find some people, and they said, you know, we have been carrying people all day long. It's 7 o'clock now, and we want to go home. We'll do it first thing tomorrow. So what am I going to say? You have to? So I went to my mom and I told her, and she says, so I'll be here another night. And in the morning, when we woke up, I went to that mess hall to try to get something to drink for my dad and my brother. And as I go in that hall, I figure, let me see and what mommy wants. Because there was coffee, tea, milk, I don't know what they had. And I'm going to look for my mom. She's not at the same place. That thing is, that stretcher has been moved. And when I saw her, I found my mother had died during the night. She had been 36 years old. I think I don't know whether she realized we were liberated. Her children had a chance. And it was terrible. Then I had to go tell my dad, and my mother wore glasses. So I went to tell my dad, and he said, please darling, go back and get your mom's glasses. He got out of bed, he wanted to go, and then he collapsed. So I came back, but her body was gone. So I looked outside, I see people carrying these bodies, so I thought that could have been my mother. No, that's not a woman, it's a man we have there. I said, I want to see. Well, it was a man. You know, she was 36 years old. I still don't understand. She went through all this misery with us. She knew we were liberated. And I have missed her, really every day of my life. I'd like you to remember that during the years 1942, July 1942, and September 1944, 93 trains, most of them sealed boxcars, without food nor water, left Westerbork. Westerbork was the camp in Holland. Those 93 trains carried a total of 103 men, women, and children. 34,000 of these people were sent to Sobibor, a camp in Poland. Out of 34,000, 19 survived. 60,000 Dutch Jews were sent to Auschwitz. Out of the 60,000, 500 survived. 5,000 Dutch Jews were sent to Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt had no gas chambers, so if you were lucky enough to be able to stay there, your chances of survival get better. And 1,300 people survived. 4,000 Dutch Jews were sent to Bergen-Belsen. My family and me among them. Also, Bergen-Belsen had no gas chambers. 1,100 of us survived. Out of 103,000 Dutch Jews, there had been 2,919 survivors. It's very hard to think of it. Try to visualize it was 1 out of every 35 people that survived that ordeal. And I find it every time when I talk about my experiences, it's unbelievable that I can sit here and tell you this. It's a miracle that I can speak about it. How was it possible that we ever survived the humiliation? And when I speak to you, I really like you to remember all those people whose humanness has been denied them. Also, the whole world stood back and grew very silent. They suddenly believed that a Jew was really not a human being any longer. And when I relive the past, it will only make sense if you, future generations, will always remember the genocide and its millions of victims. I hope that I have been able to transmit some relevant moral values to all you young people. And I feel strongly that to speak about the incomprehensible crimes have never been greater than today. Dislike of those different than us can lead to gas chambers. Never ever deny the truth. Always guard yourselves. Protect our freedom. Never ever take that precious freedom for granted. And never forget, racism is evil. It debases and degrades the dignity of men, all men. Thank you.
You have the opportunity. We have about 20 minutes or so left in the period. And Ms. Knapp has said she's kind enough that she'll answer some questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. Okay. What's your question?
Did you ever have a chance to meet Anne Frank?
No. When we first came into Bergen-Belsen, we came into a barrack that had a little area with wooden tables and benches, and maybe an area with beds that were bunk beds, maybe for about 150 to 200 people. I don't think that lasted for 6 weeks. Then it was only beds, and they were triple bunk beds. Food was kool. You know what a koolrabi is? And it's a big turnip and it's orange. In that family, it's awful. It's awful. more. And that was the food. Sometimes we got it early in the morning. Sometimes we got it late at night. We never knew when it was going to come. And frankly, I could never swallow it. I remember that my mother was standing there and I ate, and I couldn't swallow it. I could not swallow that food. Frankly, when we got back to Amsterdam, I had to be taken to the hospital immediately. And as we walk up the steps to the hospital, and I was taller than I'm now because I shrank in the last years, but you know, this height. And my dad said, you know, darling, I'm walking in front of him, you've gained some weight already. When I got into the hospital, they put me on a scale. I had no hair on my head. I was only bones, flesh and bones. And when they put me on the scale, I weighed 54 pounds. 13 years old. I ate fast. And pretty soon, when I didn't like the hot food all that much, the people in the hospital started to save their bread because they knew that I liked it. I could eat a whole bread, didn't bother me. I could eat a lot of hot cereal, I loved that. Oh, you want another? Yes, I'll have another one. But I can still go wild when there is something that I really like. You know, my father had to pay a great deal of money to get us into Bergen-Belsen because there were no gas chambers there. I wouldn't have been seated here if we had been sent to Poland. We would have been brought straight in the gas chambers. I am happy that I wish I hadn't existed, but I'm happy I survived. I went back to school, well, I was in the hospital, I went back to school, and I came to the United States. And I had a good life here. I don't know if this, I hope a thing like how this could have happened, I still up to this day don't understand. And I don't think anybody can understand that there's such a hatred. You never have to love everybody, but you can certainly respect everybody. Such hatred, such wanted to get rid of every Jew on the earth. It's not totally abnormal human beings. Anyway, yes?
Did you get the permanent,
And no, when we went to Bergen-Belsen, I told you my father had to pay for that privilege. We were supposed to be exchange Jews. That is, there were Germans in captivity, and there was one group that was exchanged, but it never really happened further. It was a group of maybe 200 people that we were to be exchanged for German prisoners of war and sent to England, or I don't know wherever they had those, but it never happened. And that is, I went back, when we were liberated 50 years, there was a group that left from Holland, people that were liberated at the town of Tröbich, where I was liberated, that wanted to go back, and there was an organized group that we went to Westerbork, We went to Bergen-Belsen, that was flat because the English burned that down. The diseases and the filth was so rampant, it was nowhere as horrendous as it was in Bergen-Belsen. I remember, and so the English burned the camp, was liberated by the English, down completely because these diseases had to be eliminated. And so we went to Bergen-Belsen, and from Bergen-Belsen we went to Treuwich. We had a trip of about a week in a bus, and we came back to Amsterdam, and then my youngest son wanted to go. Nobody wanted to come with him, so I said, okay, I go with you. I don't like going back. I'm never going back again. It's painful when I talk about it. It's painful when you see all this, because I know even though it looks like a big park now, I still see the barracks. I still see the appel grounds. We were counted every single day, sometimes 2 times a day, sometimes 3 times. And when it was beautiful weather, that it wasn't terrible to stand outside, they counted you. You were in rows of 3, 6, 9, 12. Well, we were in rows of 5, barrack by barrack. And that was how we were counted. And when the weather was really nice, that it wasn't so terrible to be standing outside. I don't think that appel lasted 45 minutes. But when the sun was beating down on open fields, or the snow was yay high and it was cold that winter, it took a long time. They had you standing there because they decided somebody was missing. Well, nobody was missing. And we stood for hours, and we sometimes had the appel twice a day. I also remember that once, I think it happened twice, but I only went once, we were going to get showers. If I think of it, if you hear about the showers in Auschwitz, we were lucky that I didn't see any water. And I remember how we walked into these showers, a big room like this, and there were showers everywhere, and we stood under a spray, maybe 4 or 5 women under that thing. I don't think I got any water. And of course we had to give up our clothes, and the lice, the filth. You have no idea in what kind of a filth we lived. And so they had taken the clothes and put them in hot rooms so that they could kill the lice of our clothes. But instead of the lice, they probably killed, but it opened up what do you call oh God, that the lice comes out of an nits, yeah. And the heat opened up, and you had to put your clothes on. The snow was ouse, ouse, ouse. I can hear them screaming. And you pick your clothes, but your clothes are so hot. They had put it in these things to kill the nits, but they didn't. And you couldn't put it on your body because it was hot, and you have to go out in the snow. No, whatever was charming, they thought of.
How did your relatives or your friends die in these concentration camps?
In the gas chambers, and who was in Bergen-Belsen, people that died there, died from hunger. You have no idea. I know we all say, dinner ready, lunch ready, we are hungry. We really don't know what hunger is. It's always an empty, always you can eat anything.
Lucia, you had a question?
long did you stay in the camp?
How long, by the way?
How long did you stay in the camp?
We were in the camp to about a year, about 18 months. Too long. A day is too long, an hour is too long.
Were you the only one in the family to survive?
No, my brother and my father did too.
Brother and father?
But today I'm the only one.
Yes, Miguel?
What was your career choice when you went back to school?
What did you do, what did you end up becoming after, you know, what did you do for a job?
Frankly, I worked in women's fashions. I loved clothes. I still do. Yeah.
In the concentration camps, I believe you have to work as well, but which job were you stationed at in the concentration camp?
Okay, that's a good question because children under the age of 15 didn't have to work. And I'll tell you something. I'm sure you all are sometimes dissatisfied with school and the homework. Enjoy it. Take it in, because we had no books, no libraries, no schoolings, and children under the age of 15 only had to stand for this appel, for the roll call. Otherwise, we did nothing. You couldn't be in the barracks, so you walked around like an idiot. Your brain suffocates when there is nothing to do, when you can't read a book, when every day you're more hungry. And every day, unfortunately, more people die. And of course, fortunately, Bergen-Belsen had no gas chambers, so there was only a small crematorium. And at the beginning, one person died, maybe 2, 3. But then people were dying by I don't know how many. And they would pull them off the beds or whatever it was. And they were, wherever your eyes could see, there were bodies lying around. And I have seen children play with the bodies. I was a little frightened of them. And I don't get frightened easy, but I didn't like it. And
A few more questions? How old were you when you were liberated?
I was 13.
What kept you going? What allowed you to keep fighting?
I do think there is part of your nature, but having had my dad and mom around me and my brother, you know, unfortunately my mother couldn't survive, but it made you feel nothing could happen to me as long as I had my parents around me. And I don't think that I would have, if it had lasted another week or two, I wouldn't have been here talking to you. But I'm glad I can talk to you. I wish I didn't have to. He was in the same camp, yes. When he was in jail, when we were picked up from Amsterdam first, he was still in jail in Amsterdam. And when he came out, at a certain moment they let him out, and he went to wherever that ghetto was finished, because there was nobody there any longer. And he says, where are my wife and children? So he's there in Westerbork. But you know, if you talk to us, he was a very strong individual, and whatever they wanted to know, he wouldn't give them. We let your wife and children come. He says, I told you all I know, whatever it was. I don't know exactly, but he never. So they said, okay, then we'll send you to Westerbork too. And then they put him, I mean, we were jailed, but there was a jail in Westerbork too. And he had a pair of blue overalls, and that had a red bag in there, so everybody knew he was really a criminal. And he lived in that pair of overalls all the time. We had no clothes. I remember that my husband said to me one day, "You must have been jubilant." Who can be jubilant? You know, we were sick. We were closer to death than being alive. I don't know. You didn't have that feeling of, wonderful.
Let us once again give her a warm, thank you. Okay.
You all deserve the applause. You were a wonderful audience. And I'm very, well, I wish I didn't have to tell it, but I'm pleased that I'm able to tell it. And I hope that you have learned something from it.